The dashboard clock read 10:17 p.m. Ethan Carter had been on the road since before dawn. His shoulders carried the weight of a long day, and the coffee in the cup holder had gone cold hours ago. He'd planned to finish by 8, but an urgent package had arrived just before closing, and that was that. Someone needed something, and getting it there was his job. Now, he was deep into a stretch of old Route 66 he didn't know, and the night had turned against him. A winter storm had settled over the desert without warning. No thunder, no buildup, just a gray, woolen weight pressing down until the horizon disappeared. Fog thickened with every mile until his headlights carved out only a short tunnel ahead. Beyond that pale cone of light, the world simply stopped existing. No other cars, no signal on his phone. The GPS had quit an hour back, and he'd switched off the radio rather than listen to static. The silence felt less like quiet and more like something leaning against the windows. The road goes somewhere, he told himself. They always do. He was leaning forward, watching the asphalt, when the headlights swept across something on the shoulder. An old wooden rocking chair, someone sitting in it. The figure was perfectly still, not the stillness of rest, but the stillness of something without breath. As the headlights crossed its face, Ethan caught one pale flash, a forehead, 2 dark hollows where eyes should be. Then the fog closed back over it. He pressed the gas and told himself it was nothing, a vagrant, a trick of shadow, a tired brain finding shapes in the dark. He kept driving. 20 minutes later, a roadside diner appeared out of the fog. Peeling paint, a neon sign that flickered more than glowed, a rusted pickup in the gravel lot. One window cracked through with a clean, violent line. The place looked like it had been closed for decades. He drove past without slowing. 20 minutes later, it appeared again. Same sign, same truck, same cracked window. His first instinct was that he'd looped somehow, taken a wrong turn without noticing. He scanned both shoulders for any intersecting road. There was nothing. The highway had been straight the entire time. He checked the clock. 8 minutes had passed since the first sighting. Not 20, 8. He pressed harder on the accelerator. Mile markers slid past. The fog churned around the car. He pushed through it, watching for any landmark, any headlights coming the other direction. The diner appeared a third time. The panic arrived the way cold does, starting in the chest, spreading outward. He noticed the fog differently now. It wasn't drifting the way wind moves fog. It was circling, slow and deliberate, as if being stirred by something beneath it. The darkness beyond his headlights felt denser than darkness had any right to feel. He kept driving because stopping felt worse. Then he saw the jacket. Red, old, weather-beaten, lying flat in the center of the lane as if dropped mid-step. He didn't slow. He passed over it and checked his mirrors. It disappeared into the fog behind him. 5 minutes later, it was there again. Same spot, same position. He drove through it again. The third time, he stopped. He sat with the engine idling, listening to his own breathing. Then he got out. The cold hit differently here, sharper than the temperature explained, specific to this stretch of road. Fog curled around his ankles as he walked to the jacket and crouched over it. When his fingers touched the fabric, he yanked them back. It was warm, not ambient warm, body warm. He stood. The fog shifted. They emerged slowly, first one, then clusters, human figures standing on both sides of the road, stretching back into the darkness as far as he could see. Dozens of them. Faces angled toward him, hidden in shadow, not moving, not making a sound, just watching with a patience that felt old and deliberate. Ethan ran back to the car, locked the doors, and drove. The figure appeared without warning. No gradual shape forming in the mist, just suddenly there, standing in the center of the lane. He hit the brakes hard. The headlights settled on its face. His own face looked back at him. Not dreamlike, not approximate, exact. Same jaw, same hairline, same crease between the brows he'd seen in the mirror that morning. It wore his clothes. It stood the way he stood when exhausted. And it watched him with an expression that skipped thought entirely and landed directly in the body. Cold, nauseating, wrong. Then it smiled. And the smile didn't belong on a human face. It took one step forward. Ethan floored it. He watched the figure refuse to move as the distance closed, and then the impact came, violent, shuddering the whole car. Something dark hit the windshield. The road ahead was empty. No body, no mark, nothing. He was still trying to breathe when the sound started on the roof. A slow scrape, deliberate, something moving its weight from one side of the car to the other. The metal creaked. Long scratches echoed through the cabin. A shadow crossed the passenger window, and for one terrible second, a pale face pressed against the glass and stared in. Then it was gone. The steering wheel jerked hard to the right. He pulled back with both hands, but the gravel shoulder was already under the tires, traction gone. The dead tree at the edge of the headlights came up too fast, too close. When Ethan opened his eyes, the pain was gone. That was the first thing he noticed, the complete absence of it, where there should have been a great deal. He was standing outside the car. Red and blue light pulsed through the fog. Emergency vehicles, voices, boots on gravel. He moved toward the wreck. The front end was destroyed, folded around a dead tree. A paramedic worked at the driver's door with quiet, focused urgency. Ethan stepped closer. The man behind the wheel was him. He looked at his own face, slack, still, at his own hands in his lap, at the blood on the dashboard. He didn't need anyone to explain it. The storm, the wet road, the curve taken a fraction too fast. The crash had been quick. These things always are. Everything he'd witnessed on the highway, the looping diner, the watching figures, the duplicates standing in his headlights, none of it had been the road. It was the place you go when you can't accept you've already arrived at the end. A highway that leads only back to itself because there's nowhere else left. The crews finished their work. The lights faded. The desert took back its silence. Far down the road, a new pair of headlights appeared. A lone car moving through the storm, its driver checking the clock, watching for exits, telling themselves what drivers always tell themselves in the dark. The road goes somewhere. They always do. On the shoulder ahead, a rocking chair sat waiting, and slowly, in the still desert air, it began to move. Back and forth, back and forth. Patient as anything that knows it will never run out of travelers. Black Hollow was the kind of town that made you lower your voice without knowing why. Tucked deep in the forested hills of West Virginia, it was small enough that everyone knew their neighbors and quiet enough that you could hear the creak from most front porches. Dense woods pressed in on all sides, close enough to feel like a presence rather than scenery. At the edge of town stood an abandoned Victorian mansion. Vines across the walls, sections of the roof caved in, windows that caught the light in a way that made them look less like glass and more like eyes. Locals had stories about the place. Most newcomers dismissed them. Emily Parker was one of those newcomers. She'd moved to Black Hollow after graduating college, drawn by cheap rent and somewhere genuinely quiet. Practical by nature, skeptical of anything she couldn't explain, she wasn't interested in ghost stories. When her friends dared each other to approach the mansion one chilly October evening, she went along out of boredom more than anything else. Inside, dust covered every surface. The air smelled of damp wood and something older beneath it. Moonlight came through broken windows in long, pale strips. Emily moved through the front room slowly, finding nothing interesting. Then she noticed a second shadow beside her own. It moved along the wall, slow, unhurried, in a direction her own shadow wasn't moving. She turned. The room was empty, but the feeling that something was there didn't leave with the looking. It settled at the back of her neck, the specific discomfort of being watched by something that knows you can't find it. Then came a footstep from somewhere deeper in the house. Then another, slow, measured, deliberate. The sound of something that wasn't in a hurry because it didn't need to be. She left, told herself it was the house settling, an animal wandering in from the woods. Old buildings made noise, but the footsteps followed her home. It started that same night. She was almost asleep when she heard it, a soft step in the hallway outside her room. She got up and checked. Nothing there, door locked. She went back to bed. The sounds continued every night after that, sometimes circling the outside of her house, sometimes stopping directly outside her bedroom door. Every time she looked, nothing. They didn't escalate or announce themselves dramatically. They simply persisted with the patient consistency of something that wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't the only one. Rick, who ran the barbershop on Main Street, had a habit of closing up late. One evening, walking home along a road near the tree line, he became aware of footsteps behind him. They matched his pace exactly. He sped up, they sped up. He slowed, they slowed. He stopped, and the road behind him fell silent and empty in both directions. Then, a pale figure appeared between the trees ahead. Still, its eyes catching the darkness in a way that eyes shouldn't. Rick ran the whole way home and didn't leave after dark again. The stories spread quickly. A schoolteacher heard footsteps behind him every night on his walk home. A nurse saw a shadow outside her window before hearing pacing in her backyard. A veteran described footsteps crossing his roof in the early hours. The details varied, but the pattern never did. First the sound, then the feeling of being watched, then something glimpsed just beyond sight. Fear moved through Black Hollow the way cold moves into a house, gradually, through the gaps, until it was everywhere. Businesses closed earlier, porch lights burned all night. The quiet that had once felt peaceful became something else entirely. A state investigator named Daniel Hayes arrived as winter threatened the hills. Methodical and unsentimental, Daniel reviewed reports from dozens of residents and found what the local sheriff had missed. Every witness had either been inside the mansion or spent significant time near it. That was the thread. He pulled old records, newspaper archives, surfaced a name: Eleanor Whitmore. She'd owned the mansion, lived there alone, and one day simply vanished. No body found, no suspects identified, the case left open and eventually forgotten. Rumors had persisted for decades that she'd been murdered, buried somewhere on the property, but nothing had ever been confirmed. Emily had been following the same thread from the other direction. The footsteps at her home had never stopped, and their patience had shifted her from wanting to ignore the situation to needing to understand it. She contacted Daniel, and together they assembled a small group willing to return to the mansion one final time. They went just after midnight. The building was worse by moonlight, shadows deeper, silence more complete, the air inside carrying a cold that felt specific to the place rather than the season. They searched room by room for nearly an hour and found nothing beyond dust and decay and the particular sadness of something abandoned to fall apart slowly. Then Daniel pulled back an old rug in the basement and found a rusted metal hatch. It took effort to force open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the air rising from below cold in a way that had nothing to do with ventilation. They went down. At the bottom was a hidden room, stone walls, ancient beams, sealed and forgotten for generations. In the center sat a weathered wooden coffin. Scattered nearby were personal belongings, thick with dust. Among them, a tarnished silver locket engraved with the initials. Then, the footsteps started again, slow and heavy, filling the underground chamber from no direction they could identify. The walls seemed to absorb the sound and return it amplified. Dust fell from the ceiling. The temperature dropped sharply. And something else entered the room that wasn't a sound or a shape, but a feeling. Grief. Enormous and old, belonging to someone who had waited a very long time to be found. Authorities excavated the site the following week. Human remains were discovered beneath the basement floor. Forensic analysis confirmed it. Eleanor Whitmore had been murdered and buried beneath her own home, hidden there for nearly a century. Black Hollow held a proper burial, a small memorial, and gradually the town began to exhale. The mansion was demolished, the chamber sealed, the footsteps stopped. Life returned. Businesses stayed open after dark, children played outside again. The quiet went back to feeling like quiet. 3 weeks later, Emily was reading in her apartment on a still winter night, snow drifting past the window. She heard a single footstep, soft, inside the apartment. She looked toward the hallway. Nothing there. It came again. Then another. The same slow, deliberate rhythm from all those months ago, as familiar now as her own heartbeat. She sat very still. And in the dark, beyond the hallway, something unhurried kept walking, patient as it had always been, waiting for whoever would hear it next. Rachel Morgan had spent 3 years proving that ghost stories were nothing but bad lighting and overactive imaginations. She was good at it too. Her YouTube channel, Debunked, had over 400,000 subscribers. People who tuned in every week to watch her walk through supposedly haunted houses, old asylums, and forgotten cemeteries, and walk right back out with a perfectly logical explanation. Old pipes, drafty windows, infrasound from HVAC systems messing with people's heads, every single time. So when her producer sent her a tip about a small inn in the Colorado Rockies with a 70-year reputation for paranormal activity, Rachel didn't even hesitate. She booked the room, packed her equipment, and drove 7 hours into the mountains. Blackwood, Colorado had a population of around 1,800 people. It sat deep in the San Juan Range, surrounded by ponderosa pines and not much else. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and winters lasted 6 months. The Blackwood Inn had been operating since 1923. It was a 3-story Victorian building with a wide front porch and enough character to feature in a dozen local history books. Guests loved it, except the ones who stayed in room 217. Those guests kept reporting the same thing. Footsteps. Not from the hallway, not from the room above, not from outside. Inside the room, in the middle of the night. Walking back and forth across the floor. The reports went back to the 1950s and had never stopped. Rachel had heard this kind of thing 100 times. She checked in on a Thursday evening in January. A fresh snowstorm had rolled in off the peaks, and the town felt sealed off from the rest of the world. The innkeeper, an older woman named Margaret, handled the check-in without much conversation. But when Rachel mentioned she'd specifically requested room 217, Margaret's expression shifted. Only for a second. Rachel noticed. She always noticed. By 9 that evening, she had 4 cameras set up throughout the room, motion sensors on both entry points, and a digital audio recorder running on the nightstand. She ordered takeout from the only place still delivering in the snow, ate at the desk, and reviewed her baseline footage while the storm pressed against the windows. Nothing. Around 1 in the morning, she closed her laptop and turned off the lamp. She was asleep before 2. Something woke her at 1:43. Not an alarm, not the wind. A footstep. Heavy, deliberate, somewhere near the foot of the bed. Rachel sat up. The room was dark except for the pale blue glow of her equipment. She grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and swept it across the room. Empty. She checked the door. Still locked. The window was sealed. No one had come in. Floor settling, she told herself. Old building, cold night, classic. She lay back down. Then it happened again. One footstep, then another. Slow and measured, moving from the far corner of the room toward the door. The sound was solid, not a creak, not a pop. The sound of weight shifting across hardwood. Rachel grabbed her camera and hit record. The footsteps stopped immediately. She sat there for 10 minutes in the silence. Nothing. She checked her footage in the morning. The cameras had recorded exactly what she expected. An empty room. No movement, no shadows, no orbs or mist or anything that would get clicked on by conspiracy boards. But the audio was different. At 1:43 a.m., all 4 microphones had captured the footsteps clearly. 32 seconds of them, moving in a deliberate path across the room. Rachel sat with her headphones on and listened to it 4 times. She didn't have an explanation. She spent the next day in the Blackwood Public Library going through the town's newspaper archive on microfiche. Local history, property records, incident reports. That's where she found the story of Thomas Reed. In February of 1954, Reed, a traveling salesman from Kansas City, had checked into room 217 during a blizzard. He was supposed to leave the next morning. When the innkeeper knocked at checkout time, the room was empty. His suitcase was still there, his wallet was on the nightstand, his car sat in the parking lot, keys in the ignition. Thomas Reed had simply vanished. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever offered. The case went cold within a year. Rachel drove back to the inn in the dark. The second night was worse. At 1:43 a.m., the footsteps returned, louder this time. They circled the bed slowly, the way someone might pace while thinking through a problem. Rachel lay still and kept her breathing steady. Then she saw the shadow. It stood in the doorway, tall, still, human-shaped, not moving, just present in the way that certain things are present in the dark when your mind can't argue them away. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Rachel's breath fogged in the air above the blankets. The old alarm clock on the nightstand stopped. 1:43. Then the shadow was gone. The footsteps stopped. The room went warm again. She reviewed the footage one final time before checking out. The cameras again showed nothing visual, but under the footsteps on the audio, barely audible, buried beneath the static, was a voice. Male, quiet, repeated over and over. Rachel boosted the gain and put on her headphones. I never left. The video went live 6 weeks later. It became the most watched upload in the history of her channel. Rachel never offered a conclusion, no debunk, no explanation, just the footage, the history, and the audio. A lot of her regular viewers didn't know what to do with that. Neither did she. Guests at the Blackwood Inn still occasionally ask for room 217, and according to the staff, some of them still wake up at 1:43 in the morning to the sound of someone walking across an empty room, looking, maybe, for a way out.